Okay, so we'll start, I think. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Leeds Inclusive Growth Extended Delivery Partnership session webinar. We've got a very busy agenda today, but first and foremost, I hope everybody's well and coping with the current lockdown arrangements. We'll soon be able to, children back at school, soon be able to have haircuts and a bit more social engagement. I think we've just been chatting before the meeting and how we're all looking forward as social animals to being able to meet with friends and family in a more relaxed way. So hopefully you're all well and family are well, and looking forward to today's session. We're going to hear from the new executive member for the economy as well, Councillor Mary Harland, in a moment. But before we get to Mary, I also want to say a thank you to Councillor Judith Blake. Judith's been a really great supporter of inclusive growth in Leeds. It's been very much a centre of her aspirations for the city, along with her colleagues. She's been a great ambassador and supporter and leader for us both in the city, but also in West Yorkshire and across the north of England. And but she's always done that in a way that, for me, has been thinking about the individuals and the families and the communities at the heart of all of that. So I want to say thank you to Councillor Blake for all the support she's given us and the team. But also congratulations to her in a new role where she will be Baroness Blake shortly. I think it's due later this month. So thank you very much. I'd also just want to give a few housekeeping for us today. We've got the event being recorded, so I hope everybody's happy with that. If not, you just have to acknowledge that, I think, when you sign in. So we will be recording it. We will be posting it on the internet for people to view at a later date. And we've also got the opportunity for you to comment as we go along. So if you use the hashtag #LeedsRecovery, then you'll be able to carry on the conversation, add to the conversation, share ideas, and keep the process of developing our inclusive growth plans going through Twitter. We've got a really good attendance today. Over 160 people have registered. So if you want to join in terms of engagement, then there's two ways you can do that. You can send us comments through the chat function on your screen. And if you want to ask a question when we get to the Q&A, then if you put that into the Q&A section, then we'll pick up those and we'll try and get through as many as we can through even myself when we get to those question and answer sessions. So we've got a very busy agenda. We'll first hear from Councillor Mary Harland, and then we'll hear from Eve, who will just give us a brief scene setting for the day. And then we've got a keynote speaker, Olivia Robinson from Mckinsey, who's going to talk about the future of work. And that will be followed by an employment and skills panel, which will be moderated by Eve. So we'll make sure that our panelists give us some thoughts from themselves on the future of work and in future employment and skills. And then we'll have a Q&A session with the panel. And then we'll have a short break for 5 minutes or so, just comfort break. And then we'll hear from Tom Riordan, providing us with a strategic overview of what's been happening in the city during COVID, and also what we'll be doing as we come out of the latest lockdown. And then we'll have a Q&A session with Tom. So if I can hand over now to Councillor Mary Harland, it's a great opportunity for us to welcome her in her new role as the executive member for economy and culture as part of the new leader of Leeds City Council, James Lewis's new executive team.
Thank you, Nigel. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Mary Harland, one of the 3 members representing the Kippets and Methil ward in this great city of ours. I've recently become the executive member for the economy and culture, taking over that portfolio from, as mentioned by Nigel, by Councillor Judith Blake, so some big shoes to fill. And I'm sure you'll join me in wishing Judith every success as she takes her seat in the House of Lords. Within the council, I've chaired a number of committees, most recently the cross-party Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Board, which meant listening to a wide and diverse range of views to make sure that the council spends its limited resources wisely for the benefit of residents and businesses alike in Leeds. I hope to bring that same approach as an executive member. Previously, I've worked at Direct Line Insurance and I was a pub landlady for many years. So if there's any trouble today, I might have to ask you to leave. On a more serious note, my heart goes out to every business owner in the city who's had a difficult year since the first COVID lockdown. I know that it can be a stressful job at the best of times, and fingers crossed, the new normal starts sooner rather than later. Given that huge sections of our local economy will be reopening in a few months, the inclusive growth agenda will be more important than ever. As councillors, we represent every person in our communities, so it follows that we want to see everyone prosper. Moreover, we believe that one person's success can support another person's success, and so on. We know that many people in Leeds will have found the last year very challenging financially. As a council, we want to drive forward a strong, speedy economic recovery, but steer it in a direction that benefits as many people as possible, particularly those who will have had a tricky time recently. We believe that Leeds has a resilient economy due to its broad base, where fortunately we're not dependent on one or two dominant industries to deliver growth and good quality jobs. Nonetheless, we can't be complacent, and we must look now at how to maintain and build this resilience. We're keen to support new and growing sectors, particularly where there's a social or environmental benefit. There will be opportunities to harness the growing global movement to address climate change, and we must grasp that as a city. The council will play a role in facilitating and supporting that. Skills and employment is another key area we need to consider. As a city, we're well placed to support people to develop their skills or retrain, given our further and higher education institutions. While this is an area that my colleague Councillor Jonathan Pryor is responsible for, I'm glad to see that we have a very knowledgeable panel discussing this today, and Councillor Pryor and I will be working together closely to make sure that we do what we can to improve skills linked together with our broader ambitions to support these businesses. We have a great opportunity today to work together to work out what's next for us as a city and what we can do to deliver inclusive growth in Leeds. If there's one message I want you to take from us as a council, is that we are on your side. No one individual person, business or organisation in Leeds holds the key to making our economy the best it can be. We as a council can't do everything, but we can play a key role in making sure that our local businesses are supported and encouraged to grow. The journey starts with the continued collaboration and innovation with a huge number of committed partners from a wide range of backgrounds, as shown through the extended delivery partnership and those of you involved in the event today. On that note, I'll hand back to Nigel to introduce Eve. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions throughout the afternoon.
Thank you, Councillor Harland. I mean, you were really clear about, you know, the importance of this group and this partnership, and I think we're great. It's really great privilege to have you as the current leader. So, and setting out such a strong vision of inclusivity and sustainable growth. I'd like to hand over to Eve now. Eve's the Chief Officer for Economy and Culture at Leeds City Council, and you know, it's been a really difficult year, as Councillor Harland outlined, and I know Eve and the team have worked incredibly hard to try and help out wherever possible and offset some of the real challenges that have been brought about, not just by the pandemic, but you know, just generally about the future economy of Leeds, the city, and the opportunities it offers for people and businesses. So can I hand over to you, Eve, and just set the scene for us before we move to Olivia?
Thanks, Nigel, and good afternoon, everybody. So it's a pleasure to be with you all again, not yet in person, but hopefully it won't be too long. So I just wanted to do a little bit of scene setting this afternoon before we get into the different sessions. When we met previously, we talked a little bit about the economic situation of Leeds, and it's worth just recapping some of that. So through the latest information that we have, we know that we've got over 50,000 people now on furlough in Leeds. We saw a 22% increase from December and January, which perhaps isn't surprising given that non-essential retail was closed in January. But at the same time, it's a significant number of people. Equally, last time we spoke, we did touch on the number of universal credit claimants across the city, and the position has stayed broadly the same since the last time we met, in terms of the increase being around 95% since March of last year, perhaps because of those numbers of people that are currently on furlough. At the same time, there are some kind of quite staggering and perhaps upsetting figures coming through around youth unemployment, for example, with that having more than doubled in a year in Leeds, as well as low earners being the ones that have borne the brunt of the unemployment figures that we've seen, or being on furlough. We also know that the impacts on the economy have really hit the service sector, which is around 10% below the level of February 2020. So there's going to be much for us to do over the coming months to help support business come out of the COVID-19 restrictions well, and to help support our economy. But on the upside, as Councillor Harland said, we have a broad-based economy in Leeds and lots of strengths. And there are reasons to be optimistic. The recent announcement around the new National Infrastructure Bank locating in Leeds is really exciting for us. That bank is going to be in shadow form from the spring, and it's going to recruit hundreds of jobs. We don't yet know whether that's in the lower numbers or the higher numbers, but a significant contribution in the city. And not only that, it will have significant influence over infrastructure projects right across the UK, and all here from Leeds. We've seen high growth investment and acquisition in scale-up businesses in digital across the city, and the digital sector has continued to be buoyant. So recent news around Infinity Works being bought by Accenture, big change securing international investment, and CRISP and BGSS continuing to recruit heavily. So it's good to see those businesses continuing to thrive and prosper. Major commitments have also been made in the city to Leeds and West Yorkshire by some of our key businesses like DLA Piper, who've committed to a new office in City Square, and to Lloyds. Many of you will know that Channel 4 kind of moved into the city not long before COVID, and quietly in the background, there's been a lot of positive things happening around TV and film. So some of you may have caught Steph's Packed Lunch, which is commissioned from Leeds and delivered from Leeds Dock, which is on every day. Hopefully you won't now go and switch your telly on to go and watch Steph, because I think she's on now. But that programme has been recommissioned, which is brilliant, because that means more portrayals from Leeds and of the people that live across the north. But there's also other exciting things happening in this sector, with Leeds Studios opening imminently. There's major brands have been secured for Trinity Leeds for the long term, meaning that whilst retail is really struggling, we do know that we are going to have some strength when those shops are able to reopen. And there's also a strong inward investment pipeline in Leeds, announcements around things that are mostly confidential but will emerge between March and May, which are reasons for us all to be to a degree optimistic. So just to kind of give everyone a sense of kind of how things have changed, what you can see on screen at the moment is a graph that shows how universal credit claimant count has changed by ward across the city. The percentage on the left-hand side is the percentage of people aged between in working age, 16 plus. So you know, you can see some significant increases in different parts of the city, which are really concerning, and we need to focus our attention on those increases to try and do all that we can to make sure that people that have found themselves out of work can get into the areas of the economy that are growing. And we'll hear more from our speakers in our panel today about how the accelerations in trends in the economy are changing the type of skills that people need, and give us some food for thought about how we might help some of these people to get into the parts of the economy that are growing. The city is also still seeing obviously low footfall, which is not surprising given, in fact, perhaps reassuring, given that we are still under the stay-at-home message, with a 74% average down compared to 12 months ago. Traffic flow at the beginning of March was around 67% compared to 12 months ago. So whilst it might feel there's quite a lot of traffic on the road at times, actually we're still below where we would normally be. The other kind of piece that we're seeing is increasing evidence, although we were obviously hearing it from staff, that that businesses are adapting their work to respond to COVID. So a business survey that was carried out at the regional level showed how businesses had adapted to respond to COVID. Furlough obviously being one of the primary routes that people were using, but also looking at asking staff to take on additional tasks, enabling remote working, or perhaps sadly laying off staff permanently. Again, some trends perhaps that Olivia and some of our other speakers might touch on in terms of the kind of global position around some of this and more of the broader local implications. So where are we going next? So we talked at the last event around our economic recovery framework and the need for us to continue to respond, also to reset and renew, and thirdly, to build resilience. In the context of reset and renew, we've now got a range of pieces of work underway to help us understand the trends in the economy and what might be permanent and here to stay and what might just be transitional. And because of that, we're looking at a number of areas. One is about the future of our city and local centres, which I'll touch on a little more in a moment. The second is a need to update our talent and skills plan. And today's event is all about kicking off some of the dialogue around that. That work is not yet fully underway, so we wanted to hear from some of the key voices across the city as we begin to shape that. We also have work underway around a new digital strategy for the city, which hopefully some of you joining today have already participated in. And as we go into the second half of the year, we want to look at how we can create more green jobs and grow the green economy as part of recovery. Finally, there's two areas where we are refreshing some of our thinking. Firstly, in terms of our innovation district and a focus on innovation. And secondly, on our cultural strategy and just refreshing that and ensuring that we have a clear delivery framework for that work. So as you can see, despite the fact that we're carrying on providing what could be considered emergency support to a lot of businesses, we're also focusing our minds on the medium and longer term. Touching on the city and district centres work, as we spoke in depth on this topic back in November, and since then we have appointed Arup to work with us to help us look at this in more detail and produce a report that will be shared in the early summer timeframe. As part of that work, the council has a city conversation underway. We're managing that in-house at the council. And if you haven't responded already, the link is on the slide, but I'll pop it in the chat, or the team will pop it in the chat while I'm talking. We've had almost 2,000 responses to date. We'd love to have more. And we will be analysing all of those responses so that they inform the report that we present. There's also been a similar piece of work that's being commissioned by the Core Cities and Key Cities groups, which is being led by Metro Dynamics. And Leeds will be a case study in that of a core city. So we're able to use that piece of work as well to relate to our own thinking. The idea is really to provide a report that will set out some recommendations for how our members and officers can use the powers and the funds that we do have to help with strong recovery for our city and district centres, but also perhaps set out areas where we might need more support in the future. So please do engage with that work. And from here, we're going to jump on to our discussion more about employment and skills. So I hope that provided you all with a bit of a grounding before we get into some of the conversation. And rather than pass back to Nigel at this point, I'm going to introduce Olivia now. So Olivia, I have to firstly say thank you so much for agreeing to speak for us. We invited Olivia to join us because we felt it would be really helpful to have that kind of global view of what's happening across the economy so that we can relate what's kind of happening in Leeds and how our people in Leeds are experiencing some of those changes to trends that are happening across the country and also internationally. There'll be a chance to ask Olivia some questions at the end, so please do use the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on that and putting questions to Olivia at the end of her presentation. So Olivia, over to you. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Eve, and hello everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me to join. As Eve said, I will be talking today about the future of work after COVID. I'm a consultant at Mckinsey Company based in London, and I'll be sharing some insights from some research we recently did with McKinsey Global Institute, which is a think tank part of our company. So let me share my screen and we can get started. Great. So as Eve said, I'm going to be sharing some insights on the future of work after COVID, starting from a global perspective and then thinking about the UK. And then I'm looking forward to being able to think together about how this could relate to the Leeds context in the Q&A. So we've recently done some research which looks at the future of work from how COVID will shape the future of work in the long term. So we're thinking about over the next decade out to 2030. And we have been looking at the impact of COVID on labour demand, on the skills required, and what are the trends that are shaping the future of work. So first, to share a couple of the key findings. We looked at this from a global perspective. So let me just share the countries that we had in scope. We were looking at the UK, but we were also looking at a couple of other European countries: Germany, France, and Spain, the US, China, India, and Japan. And so these are trends. These key findings are relating to what we found across the globe, and I will help to shape those into what does that mean for the UK. And so, kind of firstly, we found that COVID is likely to have increased the scale and the challenge of workforce transitions, with a greater number of people needing to likely change jobs over the next decade and reskill based on changes in labour demand. For the UK itself, this is around 14% more people would need to make transitions because of COVID compared to what we had expected previously. Secondly, we found that long-term disruption in the workplace is likely to be greatest in jobs which have the greatest physical proximity required in work. And this can be frontline workers in retail, food service, and hospitality. And then thirdly, we found there are three broad groups of trends which are shaping consumer and business behaviour going forward that are likely to stick to varying degrees. So one is remote working. The second is e-commerce and digital transactions. And the third is automation and AI. And there's likely to be an uptick in automation as well in the coming years. And so finally, I think for this forum, governments, CEOs, educators, all kinds of stakeholders have a big role to play in helping transition to this new world of work that we expect to see over the next few years. But we do think that given these changes, there are a number of disruptions, but given these changes, if reskilling can take place, this actually could be a very positive outcome to create a more skilled and a more agile workforce. So firstly, to talk about the trends that are shaping the future of work. So one interesting thing that we were looking at was on the physical proximity or the physical dimensions of work. And actually, this has been highlighted by COVID as something that's quite important. COVID has meant that we've all had to reduce our physical proximity. And what this means is that jobs that have quite a lot of physical proximity may well have been disrupted the most in the short term, and also may likely see some disruptions persist in the long term. And so when I say physical proximity, I'm talking about closeness to people. So how much physical interaction do you have with people on a day-to-day basis? How frequent are those interactions? How likely is it that your job requires you to meet with the same team every day, or actually lots of different strangers every day? And how likely is it that your job requires you to be in one physical place. You might think of a construction site or a restaurant where that requires you to be in a physical space, as opposed to perhaps an office where you could potentially do your work not in a physical space and do it remotely. And we've been thinking about this element because we think that the physical proximity has triggered a number of disruptions in the workplace in the short term. And so we actually took this dimension of physical proximity and we grouped occupations into 10 different arenas based on their level of physical proximity. So what we found was that the arenas with higher levels of physical proximity, we actually looked at what might be outcomes for those jobs over the long term, and found that there are 4 particular arenas which might have greater disruptions over the long time, shaped by COVID. And these are the ones that we have here in blue, which are on-site customer interactions. So these might be people who are working in retail stores and banks where a lot of work has shifted online. Could be those working in leisure and travel. While we do expect leisure travel to come back and rebound, and hopefully we can all go on holiday again soon, business travel is actually likely to be something that declines. It does not actually rebound to the same extent. And then indoor production and warehousing is an arena where there's quite high physical proximity and needing to be in a particular space, and there is likely to be some greater increase in automation in some selected cases. And then finally, computer-based office work. These are jobs which are based in offices or corporate headquarters, also likely to face disruption, for example, increase in remote working, which is likely to stick to a certain extent over time. And given this physical proximity dimension, we also looked into 3 broad groups of trends that we think are shaping labour demand and skills requirements over time. And these are firstly remote work and virtual meetings, secondly e-commerce and virtual transactions, and thirdly automation and AI. And I'll say a little bit more about those in just a moment. So if we start firstly with remote work, we did some analysis where we looked at what is the potential for remote working across based on work activities, and we were able to use that analysis to determine what proportion of the workforce has the potential to work from home the majority of the time. And if we look here at some of our results here, we found that the UK has actually quite a high potential for remote work based on the types of activities that we all do in our jobs. We found that 26% of the workforce could work from home the majority of the time, which we define as 3 to 5 days per week. And but given this, we also found that actually, around 50% of the UK workforce, you can see in the bottom of that bar there, actually has very limited potential to work from home and could only work from home less than 1 day per week or not at all. And so, this is quite there is a lot of potential here for remote working to continue, but we must remember that actually the majority of the workforce cannot do this. I think there are a number of implications for that come from this, which Eve mentioned a couple of elements from the work on urban centres, and I think there are a number of implications both in terms of the way that we work, in terms of travel and urban centres. I mentioned a little earlier, but given remote working has been relatively successful in many cases, it's likely that business travel may decline and not actually return to pre-pandemic levels, because we've found that actually you can have, in many cases, successful meetings virtually and not always needing to travel. There are some also implications for urban centres, such as Leeds and other cities. So these might be implications in terms of real estate, in terms of demand for transportation, or local services like cafes. And what we see on this page here is we looked at office demand for real estate, office real estate. We found across countries and also in the UK that office space vacancy increased quite significantly in the last year compared to the previous year. And so, for example, here on this chart, we see that Leeds had a 23% increase in office space vacancy in 2020 compared to the same time in 2019. And interestingly, we found that the larger cities tended to have a big increase in office vacancy, but actually some of the smaller cities had a decrease in office vacancy. You can see here Glasgow had a slight decrease. It's slightly smaller than some of these cities, but not all of them. But we also found this as a trend when we looked at residential real estate as well, that larger cities like London saw a big decline in rental prices over 2020, but actually some smaller cities saw an increase, which suggests that there has been, at least in the last year, a shift of people moving away from larger cities to smaller ones, or moving from the urban centre to the suburbs. We can't say how long this trend is likely to persist, but I think if there is a certain level of remote working that does stay, there is likely to be some longer term implications on real estate and on urban centres. The next trend is around e-commerce. And so we found, and I'm sure you're all very aware, that e-commerce has really significantly surged across all countries that we looked at. It surged up to 5 times more. The growth was 5 times more in the UK in 2020 compared to the 5 previous years. And when we say e-commerce, what we mean is the proportion of retail sales that are done online as opposed to in stores. And as you can see, the growth has been significant across all countries, and particularly in the UK. And this is particularly in areas of grocery, restaurant delivery, online shopping. But also we can think about this in broader terms, in terms of an increase in telemedicine has really surged across countries, and also an increase in online learning, which has surged mainly because of schools and school lockdowns. I'm sure everyone's relieved that kids have gone back to school this week in the UK, but it's likely that there may be some online learning that may persist to different degrees. And then the next and third trend that I had mentioned is on automation. And we found that we expect that automation may increase over the next few years. We found when we surveyed executives, we surveyed 800 executives globally across sectors last summer, and 68% of executives said that they had already started investing more in automation. And I think there are some particular triggers that COVID had for this, and some of the reasons why automation might be accelerating selected cases might be to help reduce workplace density, to cope with demand variability, to provide contactless customer experience, for example, chatbots or online customer service, and also to improve speed and efficiency of operations. So, for example, companies who are manufacturing vaccines needing to massively increase the production of vaccines, may have already invested more in automation to make this possible. We've also found, not shown on this page, but we did some research into previous recessions and saw that during a recession, it's likely that there may have been a decline in investment in automation, but actually it's after recession that actually picks up quite fast. So that is something that, if that's been a trend in the past, we may well see that going forwards after COVID. And so given oh, hang on, sorry, there we are. Given all of these trends and all these trends that we think are shaping the future of work, we did some analysis into what would be the impact of that on labour demand across different occupations and on the skills that are needed because of those shifts. And so let me start firstly with the impact that we found in terms of labour demand. So what we see here is we're looking at how might labour demand change for selected occupations or for different occupational groups within the UK. How might that change over the next decade up to 2030? And just to explain what we're seeing here on the page, if we look at the bars, we have occupational groups down the side. And if we look at the bars here and here, this is showing the overall percentage change in net employment post-COVID up to 2030. And then if we look at the bubbles, this is showing the difference in absolute terms, in thousands of jobs, that we have analysed between a post-COVID scenario and what we might have expected pre-COVID. So let me just walk through some of what we find. We expect that over the next decade, there'll be the greatest growth will be here in health, healthcare jobs and STEM-related jobs in particular. This is driven mainly by longer term trends, not so much driven by COVID. This will be driven by the fact that the UK has an ageing population, and therefore there is likely to be a greater demand for healthcare services. It's driven by a trend of rising incomes and growing GDP and greater expenditure on healthcare and on technology. And if we look at the types of jobs that might be declining over the next decade, over here on the right, we see a decline in customer service and sales, food services and office support. And this is partially driven by trends which were already happening before COVID, like automation was already happening and expected to have an impact, and also partially driven by trends we think COVID is shaping. So, for example, if we look at food services, it's declining here and it's declining more than what we would have expected before COVID. This is because food services is a sector that's actually very susceptible to automation. And if there is greater automation in this space, there may be a greater decline in these types of jobs. If we look at office support, for example, again, a sector which is actually quite susceptible to automation, particularly robotic process automation. And that was actually something that was already happening pre-COVID, but may potentially accelerate in selected cases. And then if we look at, for example, the declining customer service and sales, this one is slightly impacted by automation, but it's also impacted by this big shift to e-commerce and online transactions, where you actually see, with the shift of e-commerce, you see an interesting effect on jobs. You see potentially a decline in jobs which are physical retail jobs in shops, if people are really shopping more online, and if that's likely to stick. But then you would see an increase in other types of jobs. So particularly in transportation services. Yeah, I'm sure we're all the same. We've been ordering lots of parcels from Amazon. So there's a big increase in the need for last mile delivery, for example. So actually the growth in those jobs is much greater, we estimate, because of COVID than it would have been beforehand. Let me move on to what the impact might be in terms of wages. I think is an interesting one. And Eve mentioned in her talk earlier about the impact on low wage jobs in Leeds. We found across countries that these changes in labour demand are likely to result in overall over the next decade, a growth in high wage jobs. So those healthcare and STEM related jobs, and particularly technology related jobs, often high wage jobs, but actually a decline in the share of medium and low wage jobs. I think this is a really interesting thing to point out, because actually there is a specific change because of COVID, where previously, before COVID, we would have expected a growth in low wage jobs. But actually, because of some of the trends of COVID, we're seeing for the first time a likely decline in the share of low wage jobs. And these are particularly food services, customer service and sales type jobs. Then, what are the implications of these changes in labour demand for skills? I think this is a really important question. We found that we looked at, we did some analysis on how many people might need to change jobs because of the changes in labour demand. So somebody making a job transition would effectively mean the demand for their job over the next decade may decline, and therefore they may need to retrain into a different job. And we found across countries that this might increase the number of people that might need to make those transitions may increase by 25%. And in the UK in particular, which you see highlighted here in blue, the number of people that might need to transition may increase by 14%, which is equivalent to 3 million workers in the UK. In particular, these types of transitions fall mainly in production work, customer service and sales, and office support. And then we looked at, based on the number of transitions, in which of the types of demographic groups which might be most impacted. And we found that of those people that might need to transition jobs, particularly driven by COVID trends, it's the chances of that are much higher for women, for those less educated workers, or those without a university level degree, for young people, and also for immigrants. And so I will move on to the final part of my talk here, which is on what are the implications of all of these changes for businesses and for policymakers, and what can businesses and policymakers and educational institutions think about to help support the transition to the workforce of the future. So let me start firstly with the implications for businesses. And so I think kind of the main message here is that businesses have a real opportunity to reimagine and adjust the way that we work for the better. And there are 4 areas I've highlighted here that businesses could start thinking about, or already are thinking about. Firstly is where we work. So this is particularly thinking about the remote work model. For those types of jobs which are able to do it, companies will need to be really thinking carefully about how to identify which of the activities that can be done remotely and which roles can be done remotely, and how to enable a hybrid working model, which is likely to be something that may stick going forwards. And a hybrid model would be some people working remotely some of the time, but going into the office at other times. The second point here for businesses is on how we work. And so COVID, as I've explained, has led to a massive increase in the use of digital tools. It led to an increase in automation, and also some other impacts like faster decision making, perhaps flatter hierarchies, where potentially the use of digital tools has enabled there to be a faster interaction between high levels within companies and the frontline workers, and potentially more agile teams, the ability to be able to quickly make change happen because of kind of a nudge because of COVID. These are all types of things that companies can think about. How can those become embedded in work practices going forwards? You know, we heard many CEOs say that they last year saw 5 years of innovation in 5 weeks. I mean, how can some of those good practices be embedded going forwards? I think the third area is, what are the skills that we need? I'm sure this is probably quite a big question for many of the people here today. Companies will need to be thinking about what will be the transition of skills required in their workforce, and invest in reskilling. And companies, alongside educators and alongside schools and other organizations, will need to think about how can they reskill. There are lots of companies that are already placing a big emphasis on reskilling over the next decade, even before COVID, and this will become even more important because of COVID. For example, in the US, Walmart invested $4 billion in upskilling initiatives within their company, including launching academies to train people in core customer service type skills. And another example is Barclays. It launched something called the Barclays Boulder Apprenticeship Scheme, which was to help to build skills, particularly among not just entry-level workers, but also some older workers. And another interesting trend that we found when we looked at how companies can think about reskilling is we found that there are some companies that are now hiring based on skills as opposed to based on traditional qualifications. So, for example, IBM has a program called the New Cllr Initiative, which is an apprenticeship program that hires people. They have a way of hiring people based on what their skills are, and doesn't necessarily require having a degree. And then they focus on particularly skilling people, particularly in technology related roles. So here we just have a few examples of questions that might be on the minds of businesses and the types of things that businesses might be thinking about going forward. So how can we reconfigure the workforce and the workplace to increase agility and raise productivity? I'll just pick out a couple. What do we do to close a skills gap? Is it a question of upskilling, or is it a question of recruiting new people based on skills? How can we support lifelong learning? I think this is something that's very important, given the number of transitions that workers may be making over the next decade. There's more of an emphasis on lifelong learning. For example, the need to reskill and upskill at several stages throughout one's career rather than just at the start. And I think at the end here, how can we leverage ecosystem partners to increase effectiveness? I think here is really about how can private sector collaborate with public sector to help reskilling or supporting workers through these transitions. And I actually have a couple of examples I'll share in a moment. But firstly, moving to policymakers and how policymakers can think about supporting these transitions. Again, many different ways in which policymakers can think about supporting workers over the next decade. We've called out 6 main areas here. The first one is expanding digital infrastructure. And so, given the big shift towards e-commerce and online transactions, it's imperative that companies and individuals have access to affordable and high-speed internet. I think the UK does generally quite well on this compared to other countries, but if online learning or if remote working is going to continue, this must be something that is available. The second area is supporting workers during occupational transitions. So this could be many different things, providing financial support, enabling retraining. Obviously, the government in the UK has done a lot in terms of this over the last year, in terms of the furlough scheme and so forth. But there are some interesting examples from other countries as well on helping workers in this space. I think a couple of interesting examples I wanted to share was the Singapore government has been partnering with different employers in several sectors like tourism, aviation, retail and food. So some of the sectors that have been quite badly hit by COVID. And they've been partnering with them to together provide training for 330,000 local workers. Another example is thinking about ways to reskill workers differently. So the US government in the last year, when thinking about how to meet the demands of healthcare that were surging over the last year, they eased the scope of practice of the restrictions on scope of practice for nurses, so that nurses were able to retrain into new skill areas that previously had only been available to doctors, and they were able to retrain in small small areas of new skills to enable to kind of allow to meet the demand or the growing demand across healthcare. And so that's a potentially interesting thing to consider. But of course, bearing in mind the need for certification and qualification where it's required. And then thirdly, expanding benefits and protections for independent workers. So I didn't say much on this today, but there is, given the big increase in shift to digital and shift to e-commerce, there is also expected to be quite an increase in the gig economy and independent workforce. So principally driven by, for example, the massive increase in e-commerce is likely to increase numbers of jobs in transportation and warehousing, many of which are gig jobs. It really highlights the need to think about, if this is going to be a growing proportion of the workforce, how can there be a good system in place for support and benefits for these workers. I think it's been an interesting couple of things that have happened here lately that sparked debate. One in the UK on the Supreme Court decision for Uber on the classification of what kinds of benefits Uber workers should receive in the UK, and that they should be classified, what the Supreme Court decided is they should be classified as traditional employees rather than independent contractors. But you saw a different decision that took place in the US with the Prop 22 vote in California, also with Uber, where the decision was that workers should be classified as independent workers and not receive so many benefits. So there's a lot of interesting questions around this one. And I'll just say a couple more, I think, then we probably want to move on to questions. So Eve, please do jump in if we need to do that. Supporting lifelong learning. So I mentioned this before, the need to ensure that workers have the opportunity to reskill at different stages of their career. Many countries and organizations have schemes in place to do this and have also introduced new schemes because of COVID. So for example, the Australia government has introduced a policy to provide or to make big discounts on online learning for national priority areas, including nursing and teaching and IT jobs in the last year, to try to make it easier for people to quickly reskill in those areas where they were needed. And then two final points here, one on lowering barriers to physical mobility. I think if remote work is going to continue and companies and workers also want that to happen, lowering barriers to movement, if people wanted to move away from big cities to smaller areas, is an interesting one. There are several US states which have introduced incentive schemes to offer grants to workers if they want to move to different areas. I think it was Tulsa, Savannah, and Vermont had introduced schemes like that. And then finally, collaborating with stakeholders. Hopefully this theme has come through in a couple of points I made earlier, but there's a lot of scope for governments and public sector groups to coordinate with companies and educators in this space. A couple of examples are the US government, or some states in the US, have partnered with IBM to introduce tech training schemes that can be introduced within schools to help students gain some tech qualifications that can contribute towards university or college level degrees. There are many other examples, but maybe I'll pause there. Just
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you, Olivia. There's one, before you stop sharing your screen, there's a quick question. If you go back to your slide where you were showing where jobs were going down versus up, sorry for not knowing, I think it's slide 12, maybe, if you could scroll. Someone asked a question about whether you could just unpick, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just,
hang on a minute. I think you just, so if you go to the next, yes, right. So at the top of that slide there, it says community services. There was just a quick question. Could you just explain what you mean by community services or how you defined community services on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Community services would include jobs such as police force, firefighters, and some local public services.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. So if you want to stop sharing your slides for now and then and then our participants can see us better. So another question that came in, which was a clarification around your work before I get into policy type question. Did you take Brexit into account in terms of looking at the research you did that was specific to the UK?
No, that's a great question. We decided not to factor in assumptions around Brexit because the options of what could happen were quite broad. So we haven't factored that in explicitly.
Okay. And then a kind of question here, I suppose, which I'll frame for you is, how do you think cities can really support those in lower paid jobs facing even more of a reduction in those kind of jobs? What role do you think cities can play in that as opposed to government?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think there's a lot, there is a need for a lot of support for particularly low wage jobs, particularly in food service and customer service sector. So I think the main thing here would be supporting reskilling. This is something that's likely to happen over the longer term, because some of the demand for some of these jobs is likely to decline over the longer term. So I think just ensuring there's a real emphasis on providing reskilling or access to training for these kinds of workers, and that could be provided by companies. It could be that companies set up local programs. It could be provided by public sector organizations or universities, but I think that would be really important. If there's an example of another example of a collaboration which is interesting, this is an example from China, so very different from Leeds, but there was a need to kind of increase digital skills amongst people, and it was in Hangzhou city, and Alibaba, the e-commerce platform, partnered with Hangzhou University to provide a training scheme for digital skills. So that could be something. I saw that Eve, you mentioned there was a digital skills focus in Leeds at the moment. And so those kinds of partnerships.
You picked a great city as an example there, Olivia, unnowingly, because they're actually our sister city. So no nice pick. And also, yes, we've got some interesting work that we've done across the city on digital skills, which might crop up in the next panel discussion. So it's really interesting to hear some of the international examples and start to think about, where we're at and some of the things we're doing and how we might sort of accelerate some of them. I'm just having a quick look in the other questions as well. So, do you think the trend in pay levels pulls against or towards inclusive growth aspirations, and why?
Also a really good question. So as I had shown there, we have estimated there's likely to be a growth in high wage jobs and a decline in the share of low wage and medium wage jobs. This might look like a stark and negative picture from first sight, but I think that this can be also a positive and inclusive growth aspiration. But because if workers are able to become reskilled and the growth of jobs is in higher skilled jobs, then that can be a very positive opportunity.
Yeah, I think one of the things.
Yeah, I was going to say, if that reskilling is not there, then that is really a risk that those low wage jobs or people who are doing low wage jobs may not be able to find jobs so easily. So that is really an important focus.
One of the debates we often have is about that balance, about being attractive for people to choose our city as a place to live and make their career in areas where we don't necessarily have all the skill sets in the city, but without losing that focus of attention on supporting people who might be in some of those areas where the jobs are disappearing, and how do we get the balance right? I don't know if you've come across any of that in terms of some of your research or thinking, have you?
Could you just say the question again? So it's about...
Yeah, sorry. So one of the things that's quite a lively debate at the moment is, given that a lot of us are working from home, actually, does it matter so much about the employers anymore? Is it more about actually the skills of your people and the ability for a city or a place to attract people to live who are on those high wages and, or high skilled individuals? Yeah. So the sort of debate for us as a city is, where should our focus lie, and how do we kind of consider those different sides of the argument, I guess?
Yeah, so I think there is a really interesting opportunity for cities here with some of these changes, particularly, I know Leeds is a large city, but particularly for cities which are not the capital or smaller cities or suburbs, there's quite an opportunity here because people may be moving, as we looked at some of those real estate impacts, people may be moving to outside of large cities, to suburbs. And that does mean there's an opportunity to attract different types of workers compared to beforehand. And therefore, yes, I think that is an interesting one. But your point around employers, is it important to focus on employers? I think absolutely yes. As we also saw, the proportion of people that can remote work is still, it's 25% or 26% of the workforce in the UK, but there's still the remainder that can not work remotely very often, and therefore there is a real importance of ensuring that opportunities are available for those kinds of workers as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to time for one more question, I think, and this one's a slightly different angle, more on space, which is something you commented on earlier in the presentation. So, do you believe that there'll be more ad hoc physical meeting space, an increase in demand for that type of space as kind of more permanent large offices potentially decreases due to home working? Kind of, are you seeing any sort of trends that might have some permanence yet?
That's it, yeah. So I think when you say ad hoc meeting space, do you mean, for example, like WeWork type spaces?
Yeah, co-working type spaces.
Yeah, so I think when we think about workspaces, definitely we have seen in surveys that we've done that like executives and corporates, many executives and corporates are planning to reduce their real estate footprint because of remote working. But in terms of creating other spaces, I think that is likely to be something that could happen if people are working away from the city in which their office is. The need for having some other spaces to work in is probably quite high.
Fantastic, Olivia. Now, I'm going to suggest, if you've got time, if you wouldn't mind maybe having a look at some of the Q&A and if you don't mind interacting with people and typing answers to them, if you feel you're able to. Some of them are more Leeds specific, but just to say to everybody that's joined us, we will take all of these questions and use them to help frame this next piece of work, because there's some excellent questions in there, including the one from Joe from the Centre for Ageing Better about older workers. So we'll pick these up, and I'll try and also take some of these themes into our next session. But Olivia, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. Oh, one final thing, people were asking if it was okay if we could share your slides afterwards. Will it be possible to do that? Or if not, is there some links to McKinsey's work that people can look at?
Absolutely should be fine. I can certainly share the link to a full 150-page report for those interested. But let me share that with you, Eve, afterwards.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Olivia. Now, following that really thought-provoking session from Olivia, we're now going to move on to our panel. So I'd like to, first of all, invite our panel speakers to if you would like now to pop your videos on, and I'll just give a very brief introduction to our panelists, and then I'm going to invite each of them to just spend 5 minutes sharing with us sharing with us some information about how COVID and the changes and accelerations of the economy affecting them as a skills provider or their sector, and how they see some of this panning out. So I'm delighted that we've first of all got Professor Charles Egby, who's the Vice Chancellor at Leeds Trinity University. Good afternoon, Charles. We've got Bill Jones, who's the Principal at Leeds City College. I think you've got a new job title recently, actually, Bill. Did I get that right? Or have you've taken on a bit more responsibility recently, haven't you?
Yeah, Deputy CEO as well of the Luminate Group, which includes Harrogate and Keighley colleges. But yeah.
Thanks, Bill. Catherine O'Connell is with us, who's the Director of Leeds Strategic Workforce and Health and Care Academy. Good afternoon, Catherine. And then finally, Sarah Tulip, who's the Head of Digital Transformation at BJSS and is our Inclusive Growth Ambassador for Leeds. It's great having a problem of sunshine coming into my room after all the rain over the weekend, so apologies for me looking a bit pale. So shall we kick off with Charles, if you don't mind, Charles? Would you like to just get us started? Thank you.
Eve, can I just say a huge thank you for inviting me to this? And can I just say a huge thank you to those who have just given us an overview of the issue, and thanks to Olivia for her superb presentation. I think it's fair to say that the last 12 months have been really, really challenging for everyone and for institutions like myself, Leeds Trinity University, where during the very, very first mention of COVID, we were meant to just move online, whilst a university has been doing some online work, but the speed and the pace by which we moved online and the implications that have in terms of our learning pedagogy, and also how we reflect the impact on our students and learners. And our learners are broad, the 18-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, those with caring responsibilities, apprenticeships, work-based learners, all of them needing different needs and expectations, and we've had to address with us. And as you do that, you also need to look at the inclusive curriculum, because whilst they are a student body, they come in different shapes and sizes, as they say. And there are those whom will need to manage their disability, those who learn at different speeds. And these are the kind of things we need to worry about. But in terms of the skills and the competencies, one of the things we really found very, very quickly is the importance of the digital skills and the importance of what we call the mental wealth skills as opposed to the mental health skills. So those skills around digital proficiency, around emotional intelligence, cognitive intelligence, cultural intelligence, social intelligence, and industry connections and community connections. Those skills and competencies, in addition to your traditional course-based skills or disciplinary skills, are absolutely important to us. And an ability to have what we call the connected campus and beyond, dealing with digital poverty is huge, given that we are a university that deals with a widening participation, and our students coming from different demography was a huge challenge. I have to say we've embraced that challenge, and my colleagues in the university, both the academics and the professional services staff, have really managed that so well. So we are now transiting into a new normal, and there are lessons we've learned, and some of those lessons, if permitting, Eve, I'm happy to share those. But it has been a very huge learning curve, and dealing with the mental health as well of staff and the mental health of our students.
Perhaps I'll return in the questions just to kind of a little bit about what you're going to take forwards from some of the experiences. But before we turn to that, Bill, would you like to just make some opening remarks?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eve. Thanks, Charles. So the pandemic for us has obviously had a massive impact on our students. It's hard to study remotely when you're learning vocational skills, particularly in technical subjects, crafts. No one would commission an engineer or an electrician who had only learnt online. And we've worked really hard to ensure that our students have learnt practical skills during the non-lockdown periods. And we now have like a narrow window to try and get them through so they're technically competent by the end of the year. So yeah, most of our students are now back. 7,000 tests were taken in 80 specially constructed booths last week. And it's a real challenge. And at the same time as we focus on making up for lost time with our current students, we're also looking at a recovery curriculum for the cohorts of students who'll join this year and beyond. We know that students that come to us in September will have been affected by the pandemic and have missed crucial parts of their curriculum. So we're looking to build in the elements not covered. And we think that work will go on for years, if not decades, a decade or more. We're painfully aware of the impact on the pandemic on adults in Leeds. Many of our adult students have found it very hard to study remotely with the commitments of work, distraction of families, that sort of thing, and frightening statistics like 14% of Leeds workers on furlough in December, for example, make it imperative that we plan new courses that will help adults get back into work and upskill in the short term. We're rewriting our curriculum strategy, our adult strategy, so that it looks to focus on the immediate needs, reskill those who are out of work, short courses, boot camps, digital skills courses, maths and English, that sort of thing, as well as in the medium to long term, developing new provision to support sectors which are seen to be driving the economy, such as advanced manufacturing, the green economy, robotics, etc. That's probably a good introduction, Eve. Is that long enough?
No, that's great, Bill. Thank you. We'll maybe
Right.
come back to that green jobs question, because that was something that cropped up in a question for Olivia. So let's maybe explore that as well when we get into the discussion between us. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. So my role as Strategic Workforce Director for Leeds Health and Care, I've been very much focused around working with our Leeds Health and Care Academy over the last 6 months or so, to really start to transform the way we operate as part of the city. I think what we've really seen, three major differences. I think there's been a huge pace change in terms of working across organisational boundaries. So where we've seen traditional structures previously dictating in some way how we provide services to the citizens of Leeds and beyond in terms of health and social care, those barriers have absolutely come tumbling down, and we've had to work in a really dynamic, flexible, person-centred way, which has been absolutely fantastic actually to see and be part of. But it's raised a lot of challenges for us in terms of some of those more traditional and practical elements around logistics, around finance, around health and safety, around risk appetite, and all of those things which actually make an infrastructure and an ecosystem work. The second thing resonates with all of our speakers so far, which is around the digital and technology space. So as an academy, we've had to transition very, very quickly into online delivery, but we've also had to upskill our health and care workforce around digital interaction, the use of data, thinking about how technology plays out in the health and care space in terms of service delivery as well. So there's been a very rapid shift in terms of really getting to grips with what the workforce needs in terms of technology, data and digital capabilities, and not least how the academy can support that. And then finally, I think the other big thing has been a perceptual issue, but it shouldn't be understated. Health and care as a profession, I think, has really shifted in the mindset of people over the last 12 months. It's very clear that it's been an essential worker role for people through the pandemic, and where other areas of the other sectors have been losing jobs, health and care has had that real focus. But also the agility of those roles. I think there's been a lot of profile around different types of health and care roles, and we've got a lot of interest, particularly with the vaccination programme that we've been working on across the city, really collaboratively. We've had people started to be interested in health and care who never have previously, not just from an economic perspective, but actually because they're starting to understand more about the importance of that social care and the healthcare and that integrated approach across the two. And linked again back to that technology and digital issue, the value of humans in that space. So it's not about automating and replacing care and social and health services. It's about enhancing and being really clear that we add value through our technology, but actually the importance is with human skills, human values, and that human interaction that supports people through really difficult times. So lots of challenges, lots of opportunities, but absolutely resonate and can tie in with all of our speakers' comments so far. Thanks, Catherine. And Sarah.
Thanks, Eve. Yeah, I'm head of digital transformation for an organisation called BGSS. So we are a consultancy that actually specialise in engineering and technology consultancy. And so for us, it's been quite an interesting time and a time of growth, because as you can expect, organisations want to talk to us about how they do digitise. COVID has pushed that harder than anyone could ever expect. And so for us, we are providing a lot of employment and growth within the region. So we're really proud to say that in Leeds, we've added around 100 jobs since May. And that's brought its own challenges, as you can imagine, because bringing 100 people into an office where people haven't met each other, So we've been very focused on people. And it's interesting what you say, Catherine, that as a consultancy, our core skill is having fantastic people to go and help organizations. So during this time, it's been really important to us to take care of our people. And that's been one of the, I think, the biggest things and the biggest projects that's gone on internally, is how do we take care of our individuals, because they are our asset, and we care very much about them. I think it's interesting as well, actually, just feeding off what Catherine said about using technology for the right reasons as well. So people can be really frightened about that thing around digital transformation and automation. And actually, what we're trying to do is help people generate new ways of working. So new ways of generating revenue, innovating, and using technology for the right purposes. So for us, it's been a really great time to get away and do that. What I'd also add is I think it's an opportunity that we've looked internally and said that there is a lot of people who are losing roles, and how do we engage with the community? So we've done a lot more this year, and the figures are way up around using organizations like Tech Returners and North Coders, where we're looking at the people who are investing in either coming back or wanting to get into technology. And I think that there's going to be a lot more of that happening. And right now we're trying to build projects on how we do that. But also we're able to North Shore as well. So as we build international offices, it's been an opportunity for us to be able to deliver work globally from Leeds, because we can do that remotely. So that's been really interesting to think that there's a global organization and they're getting the delivery center as Leeds, and we've been able to do that quite easily without the resistance that you might normally get from a client. A challenge we have now is, we've built a distributed workforce, and our future model will be partially distributed. But I guess as our clients may demand that some of them want people back on site. So that's one of the things that we're, looking at the moment, is what our models look like sort of moving forward. But for us, it's been, a time of growth, but also a time of responsibility, and how we make sure that we're doing the right thing for the people within our city.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm just going to say to everyone that's listening, please do also, if you've got questions for this panel, pop them in the Q&A and I'll try and work them into our conversation. Perhaps rather unsurprisingly, in all of your opening comments, you all talked about digital in one way or another. So it feels naturally like the next area we should probably just dig into a bit more. So I'm just going to start with a question to you, Charles. You at Trinity, for some time, you've been you've been sort of pioneering in a way, building digital skills into all of your courses, regardless of whether someone was actually doing a digital course. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that and how that's paid off for your students?
No, thank you, Eve. I think as a university, we've known that the economy, whether it's Leeds or the general UK economy, is moving towards what we call Industry 4 careers, where we know we need to build our student base, not just on the domain area, the subject areas, but we know that whatever they do, those skills around Internet of Things, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning will come to the fore. So what we do is to make sure that those at level 5 and level 6 of our courses, i.e. second year and third year, have those kinds of competencies built in, and we make sure that there is placement for all level 5 and level 6 students. And at level 4, which is the first year, it's optional, but we make sure that the issues of careers and employability are built into their curriculum, as fixed and permanent into their curriculum, or as part of an extracurricular activity. And what that did help us, it's when we all went remotely, we noticed that some of our students, or in fact, most of our students and many of our staff are absolutely IT literate, and they were able to just move with that. And that's why we began to see very, very little student complaint. The student experience very, very high. And as we do regular surveys, we still maintain that high level of satisfaction amongst our students. The issue then becomes, how do you deal with digital poverty, given that we are a widening participation university? So we provided laptops and computers to all our students who need that, and we try to support them on their internet access at home. So it's been very, very useful for us.
Thanks, Charles. And Bill, I know you've had to overcome similar barriers for some of your students in terms of supporting them through lockdown, but also that you're thinking about how you can help people switch into digital. So do you want to tell us a bit more about what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we're similar to Charles, systematically reviewing all of our curriculum. So it's not just your obvious courses that have digital skills in them. Any course that we offer, whether that's A-levels or hairdressing and beauty therapy, you're going to need digital skills. So we're auditing the curriculum and making sure that that's covered to the appropriate level, whether that's at one end of the spectrum, just, you know, access arrangements in terms of ICT, right through to coding and networking for other courses. In terms of attracting adults into those areas, we're taking advantage of funding flexibilities, which were announced in the last spending review in the autumn. And the government is working towards lifelong learning funding, which we hope is backed up with real funding. And then we're looking to advertise those courses to non-traditional, people that may not have thought about careers in those areas. And there's been some really successful pilots. We've had some of our own short course pilots which lead on to higher level courses, but Shipley College ran a digital boot camp with funding from some sort of startup funding from WICA, which was really successful, and hopefully that model can be replicated across FE colleges and universities throughout the region.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Just in case anyone's watching not from Leeds, WICA is the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. So, thanks, Bill. No, just because I know that we have got one or two that are listening in that aren't from Leeds, so that's great. So, Catherine, you mentioned around the fact that this sort of recent experience has exposed the kind of skills that were needed by some of your workforce on the digital sides. What were the particular challenges? What surprised you? And have you found the workforce to be really responsive and adaptable?
So in short, yes, I think the workforce has been amazingly quick to adapt to the situations they find themselves in over the last 12 months. I think one of the big challenges, the virtual working is beyond just the kind of technical skills needed to work digitally. And I think there's been a huge culture shift, and we're still in the process of that culture shift at the moment. And I think that's been particularly interesting when working across organisational boundaries. So I'm particularly thinking of examples where healthcare professionals have had to come together remotely to discuss cases or to have conversations about transition of care from one setting to another. And those kind of things require different approaches, not just the kind of technical skills of how to use an online platform or how to share data remotely across different systems. So I think, as you say, it's exposed a lot of those challenges, not least in data sharing and the ability to analyse data and understand what's being shared and for what purpose. And the fact that big organisations and small organisations have very different regulations and mechanisms around some of these things. Obviously, within health and care, we don't just work with NHS organisations. The council has a big provision in health and care. The third sector has a big provision in health and care. We've got a lot of independent providers in Leeds who operate. And as far as our citizens are concerned, they want that seamless care. So I think, as I say, it's created huge amounts of opportunities, but it has helped us, I think, shape what our ongoing lifelong learning approach needs to be over the next couple of years, in particular in the digital space. And working with colleagues who are expert in digital and data, really starting to think about how that workforce development can take place. So the Academy's been putting on a short course programme, which has been there's been huge uptake on it, which is adapting to digital. And it is really getting people to think not just about the what, but the how of what that digital platform could enable people to do in their own workspace. And it's those kind of things which I think we'll see a huge need for over the coming period.
Yeah, just more, I think. It's going to be more of all of this. Sarah, I'm going to just change the subject very slightly. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A, which I think are quite interesting for an organisation like BGSS, which is how do you involve young people in thinking about your business strategy or policies, or when you're kind of thinking about an inclusive workplace? How do you include young people in it? So maybe, do you have a grad scheme? Do you take on apprenticeships? How do you think about that workforce, and how do you consider young people in some of those things?
Yeah, really, really important. And I think the hiring an entry level has been one of the core things that we've been sort of focusing on as an organisation. So the graduate scheme we've had up and running for a number of years, and that's been very focused in one area, which has been, I guess, software developers, and more conversation now is about how do we widen that out, because we're not just an employer of technology people, we employ a lot of different types of roles, and people who come into technology who might not necessarily be as techie as you would think. I don't write code, I'm not a technologist, but I work in technology. So we've been really looking at the entrance for that. So previously, we looked at people who had very specific degrees, and we've tried to really widen that out to make sure that we are building a more diverse workforce, and offering opportunities to other people who may not have sort of seen a career in tech for themselves, or may have gone to something and thought, well, I didn't do a maths or a technology degree, so there's not a space for me. Apprenticeships, again, it's an interesting time to bring on apprentices, because they generally quite young people who've not been in the workforce, and bringing them in. So we're looking at structuring that. And again, there's that other piece that I mentioned briefly, working with tech returners, working with a lot of the training, the boot camps, I guess, where anybody can go and learn to code and transfer themselves into a technology role. So right now we're really trying to grow that, and that will be for us as well an opportunity as we move globally, a way to scale our business with young, diverse, or just different talent, that will hopefully make us think about how we think differently. Because I personally, not just BGSS, think that diverse workforce is the best workforce, and we're an organisation that are building for the NHS and lots of other organisations that need diverse thinking. So it's always on our agenda, and I think more so, COVID has pushed that.
Thanks, Sarah. Bill, you said something earlier on that maybe made us all feel slightly, I suppose, concerned in a way. You were talking about the amount of repair work that you're going to have to do to support young people. So I think you said you had already put in sort of steps for next September, supporting students who'd likely missed a reasonable amount of learning, but also that it could take years or even decades to address the issues. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, and what you think it's going to mean both for you as a skills provider, but perhaps also how you might need to work with employers?
Well, we're very aware that the students have faced extended periods of remote learning, and we also know that the attendance at that remote learning wasn't as good as attendance is regularly. And we know that, so therefore we're just conscious that, and we have 3 schools in our group. We have 3 secondary schools in the Luminate Education group, and when we talk to the teachers there, they express similar concerns that the students haven't covered the breadth and range of the curriculum that they would normally do. So we're just anticipating that there will be gaps in their knowledge. They won't have studied things to the depth, the level. They may not have acquired skills that are essential building blocks before you move on to the next level of skills. So we are encouraging our heads of department to look at every single aspect of the curriculum, and to build in revision sessions, catch-up sessions where we properly audit the students' skills, because we know that they're going to be spiky coming in. There's been a great deal of uncertainty injected into the education system because of things like centre assessed grades, teacher assessed grades, and that's only one half of it. The other half of it is the effect on our students' mental health. We've seen that, the concerns raised about behaviours which are concerning, and depression, anxiety, suicide attempts, that sort of thing is very real. And so the other thing we're going to have to build into the curriculum is that sort of well-being, mental health, resilience, things that it's a serious issue. There is a commission has been appointed by the government for this very purpose, and they're talking about all sorts of strategies such as extending the school day for a year or so, shortening the school holidays. And I think my own view is that it will take a combination of similar initiatives to eventually repair the damage.
Do you think employers should be thinking differently as well then, Bill, in terms of, you know, they might need to put a little bit more of a wrap around young people, either people who might have started in their workforce, say in the last like 1 or 2 years, but also perhaps people who might be joining their workforce in the next couple of years?
Absolutely, and at the risk of being a little bit controversial, I think that employers should do that anyway, and they could do more of that. From my experience, they could possibly, you know, understandably, they expect oven-ready students when they leave college or school at 18 or 21 or whatever it is. But we all know that young people take many years to continue learning, and even at our advanced age, we're still learning. We're not necessarily the ideal employee in every area. So I think partnerships between employers and skills providers is the way forward, so that we can understand better what the skills requirements of employers are, and they can understand better how they can better continue to train and continue to educate young people and not so young people as they progress into the workplace.
Thanks, Bill. Sarah, did you want to come in? I noticed you popped up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess we do a lot in that space, and I think it's across the board as well. So, you know, I guess BJSS is lucky enough to be a large enough organisation to really address it. But just an example, during February, sort of really focused on wellness, and we were talking about wellness for parents. There was chair yoga for people who may not have mobility. There's stuff around mindfulness, healthy eating. We did art projects, and what we did was really try and do things that were inclusive for everybody. But also, one of the other things is regularly surveying and trying to get that feeling of actually how people feel, and address those things specifically. So not just guessing at how our workforce feel, and just doing things. It's really been trying to react to actually what our workforce has said they want and need at that time. And I think that's one of the things that you really need to do. So, you know, we've got buddies, we work in squads, we do all the things to try and keep people to not feel alone and protected. We socialize, but we've tried to do things for each group, and not just, you know, I think it's very easy to just put on drinks events and people, you know, the things that you would do before. And I think it's really thinking about the individual within your workplace, because one size doesn't fit all at all.
Thanks, Sarah. So Charles, I was just going to come to you just to ask you a sort of slightly, first of all, if you wanted to comment on the previous discussion, but secondly, there's a particular question that's cropped up from Dawn from Shine, who's asking, has COVID changed the future strategy for universities on how courses are going to be delivered going forwards in terms of online and hybrid? But so perhaps you might want to comment on the previous conversation and then address that from Dawn.
No, thank you, Eve. I totally agree with the comments by Bill and by Sarah. In my meeting with many other university leaders, vice chancellors just last week, we're talking about how do we address the learning gap of the level 13 who are going to come into universities, for example. How do we provide something dedicated to make sure we deal with that? And of course, for some of our students who are doing courses that have a very, very high practical orientation to that, it's been challenging, if not impossible, to do some of them online. So we need to create dedicated time to support them. So I spent the whole of last week with my executive actually trying to put in place what that means and what that also means in terms of the workload of the staff who are going to do that, and also the welfare and well-being of staff. So I think it's important we do something just to make sure we bridge that gap. And as Bill was intimating, that could take quite some time, but I think it's something we want to do. In terms of your latter question around how all these have been really impacting on the strategy. It just happens that a university like mine, I'm in the throes of developing a new 5-year strategy. And almost all the presentation content that we heard from Olivia really chimes with me. So the issue about digital technology, the real balance between the high skills and the low and medium skills job or high wage jobs is an issue. And therein lies the challenge. If you look at the UK government policy, as it impacts on higher education, there is the view of student outcomes, and the government is looking at two things in the main. What they often call good degrees or good courses. And I think we need to be very careful, because at one level, yes, we want our students to finish and to go and get jobs where they could earn £26,000 or more. We also want them to do the so-called good degrees, but all degrees support the community and support the economy in more ways than one. We heard today how there's going to be growth in the area of STEM and health, but somebody has to be doing creative arts. Somebody has to be doing food technology, beauty care. All these impact on our community, especially in Leeds, that has a broad economy. So we need to position that rightly. So in terms of our strategy, one important element is on careers and enterprise. We want to work collaboratively in partnership and in cooperation with organizations. And I dare say also with my colleague Bill in the further and education colleges, to make sure that as we build our students up, we work closely to embed career and employability and develop what I call career passports and develop career zones within our universities, bringing industry to make sure that our students are rounded. Because what we heard clearly from Olivia is that the likelihood of our students or our learners moving from one job to another is higher now than ever it has been in the past. So creating a rounded learner, not just only on the domain to get the knowledge, but to look at other skills and competencies. Some of those I did talk about are emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, digital proficiency, social intelligence, and industry connections. These are the kind of competencies they need to have over and above their traditional domain. So it's impacting on our strategy to make sure we reflect the changing environment.
Thank you. You speak so passionately, Charles. It's fantastic to listen to you. I'm just going to go to Catherine now. So Catherine, building on some of what Charles was just saying about we need to focus on all the jobs across our economy, and also just on some of the topics about where there may be more demand for healthcare and care across our city. You know, Bill was sadly touching on the fact that he's already seeing an increase in needs for mental health services, for example. How can we build on the sort of wave that we've seen around kind of people wanting to go into jobs in social care and into the sort of wide range of jobs that there are across health and care? And what can we as a city do to maybe help encourage that and to kind of support people that want to go into those roles?
Thanks, Eve. So I think one of the really exciting things about Leeds is that there is already a real appetite for doing this together. So we have a one workforce board in Leeds who have representatives from all of our big organisations and many of our small organisations who support health and care and the workforce agenda. And I think the real challenge for us is to come together around tangible pieces of work that will really shift some of these opportunities and challenges that we're all facing. So we are looking specifically around facilitated entry into health and care professions, working together around T-levels, for example, and making sure that the launch of the health and care T-level in Leeds is actually tailored around our employers and our citizens. So it meets both the needs of learners, but also with very clear job roles at the end of it, which I think is absolutely critical to map that out from the beginning. We're looking really creatively around work placements as well. So this is one of the areas which we can do as a city. which can be really innovative, but thinking about virtual work placements where people can actually get the experience of going round almost with a kind of GoPro type style approach with a colleague to their workplace and understand what happens in that workplace. We're looking at simulated environments. So our universities and our colleges have some fantastic facilities. Actually, when we can start to open these up again post-COVID, there's some fantastic facilities to get hands-on practical experience in a simulated way. And also we've got some really innovative services developing within health and care anyway. So for example, our virtual wards give great opportunity for people to come together as learners across multidisciplinary teams to try and understand services from other perspectives and learn those different skills and understand how working across boundaries can be really beneficial. I would highlight as well that we've got, particularly with the council and with our larger NHS organisations, some really fantastic programmes to support entry into work already. We've got a real focus around narrowing inequalities, and we haven't, I think, talked much other than the kind of digital poverty aspect, but there are other significant barriers to getting people into careers. So what we can do as a city, I think, is really come together in a targeted way to look at how do we support people? How do we reduce those practical barriers for people who otherwise would be fantastically suitable for our workforce, but for whatever reason they haven't had the earlier educational support, or they have got barriers in terms of responsibilities, caring responsibilities, or other obstacles around language skills or functional skills that we can potentially address as a collective. And really start to understand our responsibilities as employers, not just in really kind of practical ways, but also in that well-being space as well. Just as a quick point, I joined this role during COVID. So I started, and I understand completely, as an experienced professional coming into a new city, working with a new set of people and not being on site, not being with people, not having that kind of informal social interaction. You know, that was a challenge for me. I can only imagine what that's like for somebody who's not experienced in the world of work and who is trying to take that transition between either full-time learning or into a different environment completely. And I think we've got a huge responsibility, both as employers and education providers, to make that as seamless and supported as possible. And I think we've got some great relationships that are already starting to build on that work, but there's still more to do, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I think from our conversation this afternoon, one, I feel incredibly lucky that we've got you all as part of our Leeds ecosystem as we sort of embark on, our journey of recovery, but also as we embark on our thinking about refreshing our talent and skills plan. So what I'm just going to invite each of you to do, if you wouldn't mind, as a bit of a roundup, is just maybe offer a couple of pointers about the areas that you think we should keep in mind as we embark on refreshing that talent and skills plan from your perspective. So try and keep it to one or two, because otherwise we might run long over time. So I'm going to ask you to try and be really focused and just go, as we go through this piece of work, this is the one or two things I think that we really need to focus on as a city in refreshing that talent and skills plan. So who am I going to? Bill's looking like he needs a bit more thinking time, so I'm going to go to Sarah first. She also looks like she needs a bit thinking time.
We've talked about this a little bit with other hats that I have on, and I think for me, one of the things that really comes to mind is that there's a really big there's a really clear invisible divide, if that makes sense, between communities in the city. And actually where a lot of the roles are is within this city. And I truly believe that unlocking a lot of the talent within the city is about working with communities. So for me, my passion is, how do we get into communities? How do we change hearts and minds with each community that has different issues and different areas? How do we get into communities and open up those pools of talent? And for me, I think that's a really big thing. If we can, we can solutionize, can make a real difference. So that's something I'm particularly passionate about.
Thank you, Sarah. Bill? You've had enough time to think now.
Yeah, I'm going to say what I alluded to earlier, which is the green jobs and skills that we're going to need in the future. West Yorkshire has made a commitment to achieve net zero by 2038, I think, and that, you know, that's a huge commitment. And we need to assess the current demand for green skills in the local labour market, and ensure that with our courses are delivering the skills that are relevant to the green economy and that they're embedded into a range of occupations. That would be my contribution.
Yeah, and sorry we didn't get onto green jobs. I think we'll have to make the green economy and climate and addressing the climate emergency a theme of our future session, I think, because there's quite a lot to go out there. Charles? Oh, you're just still on mute. We did so well. We nearly got through the whole thing.
Apologies, colleagues. If the area I'm really passionate about is around lifelong learning and micro credentials. I think if we're able to really think about mobility of our qualifications and mobility of credit as part of we look at reskilling of our workforce, and therein lies the area where we need to collaborate with industry, we being the higher education sector and the further education sector, to run short courses. It could be CPD, and allow people to carry credits as they move along as part of reskilling. And at the end of the day, that credit could give them degrees as we move forward. But I think we need to do something collaboratively. Thank you.
Thank you. And Catherine?
I think for me, it's really about finding the balance between technology enhanced and human skill here. And I think that we're in a real period of transition. And if we don't think very carefully and apply our brains collectively to role design, organizational design, the work of a system and how we work as part of a collaborative system, and not as an island, I think we are going to really miss an opportunity. So I think for me, it's finding that balance and really doing that collectively.
Thank you. And thank you to each of you for a wonderful panel discussion. So that brings this session to a close. We've now got just about 5 minutes for people to be able to stretch your legs, run to make yourself a cup of tea, or satisfy a call of nature, or run round the block even. So if you just want to come, you don't feel you need to disconnect, we will be restarting just after 20 past to hear from Tom, who's going to be giving us a strategic overview and taking Q&A from all of you. So we'll see you again just after 20 past. Right. I will put a slide up just so that people know that we've not gone disappeared. Oh, that didn't work. No, it's not working for some reason.
Shall I try, Eve, to put a slide up?
Yeah, I just tried to put, for some reason it won't work off mine actually.
That's fine. So I'll have a go. I
was just thinking in case anyone sort of briefly dipped out and comes back in and thinks it's finished.
No, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Has that worked?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, it's Nigel Foster, and I'm pleased to welcome Tom Riordan, the Chief Executive of Leeds City Council. Just while you're getting yourself ready, Tom, I thought it was a great session from Eve with Olivia, really setting the scene as what the future of skills might look like in the new world, and also the panel covering such a wide area and with great passion about how we would work in partnership. Tom, you've had a really challenging year, I'm sure. You've been part of the national panel on COVID, supporting the government. You've obviously been keeping in touch with all of us on a weekly basis around what the council's been doing in response to the COVID pandemic. Can you set out how you think things are now and what your views are for the future and where Leeds is placed post-COVID?
Hi Nigel, hi everybody. Many thanks for the fantastic session that you've had. I'm sorry I couldn't be here for all of it, but I've heard, even from what I've just heard, I'd just reiterate what Eve said about feeling grateful for the people that we have working with us in the city, and big thank you to everybody for what you've done during the last year, which has been incredibly challenging for all of us. The position, just to start with, on case rates, etc., is that we are hovering around the 100 mark. Those of you who follow my daily tweets avidly will know. And we would be lower but for a couple of quite major outbreaks in our prisons. So that there's a whole testing going on of each of the settings at the moment, and that's likely to push our numbers up a little bit over the next this week. And then we hope that it might start to either stabilize as others go up because of schools going back, or we will go down a little bit more. So generally, we've got numbers down to a decent level. We'd like to get them lower, but they are stable, I would say. Secondly, and positivity is below 5%, which is good. The vaccination programme is incredibly successful and proceeding apace. The latest number was 255,000 people in Leeds, which is around a third and rising, and that will continue. And those of us in the 50 to 55 category, giving something away there for you all, will be avidly waiting for our text message this week to add to that. So the interesting for me that the reason I think that the vaccination program has been so successful is because it is actually, rather than just being a top-down approach from the NHS, it's a true partnership between all levels of the national, regional and local, of both the NHS, local government and the voluntary sector as well. And I think it shows to us the power when we work together and the difference it can make. And we know that that's happened throughout the rest of the pandemic on other things that we've worked on in Leeds. So that's the update. And I see no reason why we won't be heading for the roadmap that the government set out. And I'm increasingly optimistic that we will get to a position where we're able to do that. And we ask at every single meeting we have with the centre, are you going to bring back restrictions on a localised basis? And they tell us every time, no, we certainly don't want to. And we're always slightly suspicious about that because we're worried that that may happen into the future. But that's certainly the message coming back both publicly and privately at the moment. And wouldn't that be a wonderful place to be in? I think, where do you start almost in terms of where we go from here? I think that what the main thing I would say is that the fundamentals of the Leeds as an economy, as a city, and as a if you like a place that people want to come and work and they live in and invest in is broadly the same. We have the same people that you've heard from. We have the same institutions in place, and we have the same vision in place to be both a strong economy but also a compassionate city, and one that tries to get to net zero as soon as we possibly can. And that there is, I know you've heard from Eve, that we've had some major investor interest throughout the pandemic, and actually from conversations I've had even in the last few days, I would say that the interest in Leeds is probably higher than I've ever known it. So although, as you heard from Olivia, the office market has been hit along with all other office markets over the last year, I do expect Leeds to be well placed to respond to what will be a new way of working moving forward that will still require people to come into cities. It will require businesses and others to have a strong base in cities like Leeds, and it will just mean that there won't be as many people travelling in every day at the same time and travelling home every day at the same time to get in and out of work, and that might not be such a bad thing with carbon in mind and the lives we lead in mind. We have a lot of work going on to try and make sure that the return to work and the return to the city goes as smoothly as possible. And I think, that where I would just do a shout out, particularly for a sector that, has been hit as hard as any, the creative and cultural sector remains absolutely crucial to Leeds, and is one that I think we all need to wrap our arms around and do whatever we can to support over the next period. And I think we've all massively missed the ability to go to enjoy those things that we took for granted maybe a bit, whether it was going to the theatre or the opera or the ballet or a football match or even the pub and a restaurant. The cultural sector and the hospitality sector and retail are ones that I think we are probably the ones where we'll need to do most work to get people adapted to this transitional point of the rest of this year, but then move into what might be the new normal, where we do want to make sure that we get our brilliant both large and small institutions in the city in those sectors to continue to thrive moving forward, because they are what makes the city different. They are about our sort of DNA as a civic centre of expertise and skills and talent and ideas and people, and I just want to make sure that we move forward with that sector really strongly. And 2023 I think is the same in one sense, in terms of being a big international celebration of the great stuff that we've got going on in culture in Leeds and globally. But at the same time, I think it will be a part of that recovery and that reimagining of the sector and what's possible and what's necessary. The other thing, it's great to have Charles on the panel today, and I think innovation and universities and the education sector is going to be a massive challenge for us moving forward in terms of getting that right and helping them recover and helping make up for the inequality that has probably been widened through this last period. And that will be a big part of our joint agenda. We've had the manifestation of it with the laptops for schools type initiatives, but I think we need to fundamentally think about how we can make sure that everybody is able to achieve their potential in the city moving forward. And COVID has shone a massive spotlight on inequality and poor working practices, and we need to get that improved as we move forward, make sure that we're paying people a decent wage, that we're giving them good working conditions, and that we're supporting them to achieve their own potential moving forward. And so I suspect that major labour market initiatives are going to be needed this year, particularly aimed at young people. And moving forward, we've got to, I think, work together with the private sector and all sectors to focus on that as something that we can make sure makes us stand out, if you like, to bring that compassionate city words to a reality. We're doing some really interesting work about the city centre and district centres with Arup, and there's been 1,800 responses already in 3.5 weeks of it going out, and I'd encourage all of you to participate in that. I do think that where we're headed for is probably when all this settles to a point where you will have more of a hybrid way of working. You'll have more people who will want to spend time in a city centre like Leeds, but will also want to spend time in district centres where they live, and be able to do both. And that will help, hopefully, with the general quality of life and the way of working that we can continue with. I think it will put a big onus on hybrid meetings, so that when we run something like this in a year's time or 2 years' time, it will make no difference if you sat in a conference room in the middle of Leeds or if you're dialing in from elsewhere, and you'll feel the love, if you like, whether you're remote or whether you're in the same office as everybody else. I think that will be a really interesting one, and one that we've got to get right and work very closely on. And then just to maybe finish and leave plenty of time for questions, I'll maybe finish on 3 things. One, I think that carbon and the green jobs agenda and the opportunity there for the city is huge. We stand at the heart of the northern economy that keeps the lights on in London, where Drax has changed from being probably the most polluting power station in Europe to being an absolute trailblazer in terms of low carbon. We've had the announcement about GE going to Teesside and the Humber last week. We've got the capability in our universities. We know in Leeds we've got some of the best environmental minds in the world working with the UN at the moment, and the ideas coming out of the Climate Commission in Leeds, and now we're going to have a Yorkshire one as well, led by Liz Barber from Yorkshire Water. You know, there's tremendous opportunities there. And just taking one idea, the £100 million that the council is going to put into retrofit of housing is something that can create jobs. It saves the fuel bills of the poorest people in the city, and the district heating system that we've got that we've introduced into the city centre is having phenomenal success and is of huge interest to all the major developers now in the city centre. And that is something that is a bit of civic infrastructure that we've put in ourselves, and it plays to that idea of you know, the 21st century utilities that some of us talked about almost 10 years ago. Second issue is around technology, where I still feel that technology will be as big a driver as COVID in terms of the way that we change the way we work, and we've got to adapt as a city and as a group to respond to that. And then finally, I just wanted to do a shout out on mental health, where I actually think that although we're talking a lot about property and about estates, really Leeds will remain, the success will stand and fall for Leeds on whether people enjoy working there and enjoy living there. And if we can start a movement of, you know, making sure that we're thinking about our mental health and well-being of everybody, being kinder to each other, to being somewhere where collaboration is just part of the DNA and part of the way we work, in the same way that the tech sector has pioneered through the digital festival and Stuart Clark's support, and you know, we're seeing that in other sectors too. I personally think that will make us stand apart as well, and it will attract more and more really quality people to want to come and base themselves in the city. So I'll finish there, Nigel, and happy to answer any questions from anybody.
Thanks, Tom. I mean, you set a really strong vision there. I think you're going to get the questions from me, because our participants have been quite shy today, which is unusual. Normally, when I experience you on the stand, there's a flood of them. So, but you've raised quite a number of very important points, and I think you built also on some of the points that our panelists and our keynote speaker mentioned earlier. So if I can just start you off with one, which I know is really important to me, but I think in terms of the city, you've highlighted, and certainly Kate and Sarah, when they were talking in there on the panel, you talked about partnership. It feels to me that more than ever in the city, partnership is going to be really crucial to our future. I think one of the things we've perhaps learned in COVID is that it's very difficult for us to do things on our own. But where we've worked in partnership, and I think you mentioned it, that's been a particular feature of how we've managed to address some of the challenges that COVID has brought us. What's your thoughts on that, Tom?
I think what we've tried to do in Leeds, Nigel, is to bring. I think there was a time where partnership meant what Victor Adeboela, who's a great person I've worked with in the past, Lord Adewale now, used to describe it as the comfort of the big table. So you'd go into a partnership meeting, you'd talk about something like, you know, carbon or inequality, and everyone would say how important it was, but there would be no sense of accountability about what you're actually going to do about it. And I think what we've tried to do in Leeds is work very actively. I think we've been partnership activists in Leeds. So we've always had a purpose behind what we were trying to do. And when you look at the city centre and the city generally that we've built, where you look at our track record on children's social care, on levels of homelessness relative to others, on the way that we've developed the city in a, you know, in a more and more people-friendly way, the new plans that we now have on transport and the progress that we've made already in terms of delivering the park and rides, but more to come on mass transit, on HS2, on many other things. You know, we don't just talk about it, we do it. And I think what I would appeal to everybody to do is to get involved with that. And, you know, the South Bank, for example, is a regeneration project that's going to be over a 20-year period. It's not a blank canvas, but there's huge opportunity to work with us if you've got ideas and initiatives to do things differently. And British Library North is probably a good example of that, where we've built a really strong partnership with British Library to bring to life their presence in the city, in you know, and linking up with what they've got in London. We've done the same with Channel 4, where we didn't want Channel 4 just to come to Leeds. We wanted Channel 4 to thrive in Leeds. And more when we have those conversations, and the reason we're winning so many investments into the city is because we don't just talk about buildings. We talk about how we can get people to be more successful, and they love the sort of the vision that we have of what I call a more of a Northern European vision. It's not a build it, stack it high and build it dense and get it up as fast as possible and sell it off as fast as possible. That's not Leeds. And as a result, we're in a good place, ready for coming out of this pandemic.
Yeah, Tom, I think it's very, you know, clear that in Leeds, people matter. It's about people, it's about our communities. And I think Councillor Harland, right at the very start, set us going with a strong vision for Leeds that was about fairness and about engagement with all of our communities, so that everyone had a place in it. I mean, one of the other things that you mentioned, and one of the questions that we've had come in is about culture. I think we've got a very, very broad and dynamic cultural sector and creative sector in Leeds. You know, you've mentioned some of the big names there, but also it goes right down to all of our communities at a grassroots level. I think that's important. I think a lot of other people would think it's important, but you stressed it as being really crucial to making a difference and making Leeds a distinctive place. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, and I think it's just finding those outlets for, you know, for a lot of kids growing up, they get a chance to play a musical instrument. They get a chance to express themselves in sport or in the arts because they have access to to resort to finances to be able to achieve that, and they're able to operate in networks of people where that's the norm. You have other parts of the city where that just isn't the case, and you know, some of the work that we know, you know, our organisations do in Leeds that help those cohorts of kids and those communities make just a massive difference to people's lives, and particularly to those those young people who haven't been able to achieve their potential academically, but can express themselves in other ways, or maybe have had mental health problems and find culture and the arts a really good way to find a safer space to operate. And I would love for the pandemic for a positive to come out of the pandemic, that sort of agenda in the lead up to 2023 just releases, you know, more and more opportunities for young people like that. There are large parts of Leeds where you don't have cultural institutions based in them for many miles. And because we're such a big city, and because we've got such a strong city centre, Chapel FM in Seacroft is an example where, you know, they have developed in an area of the city that's as big as some, you know, major cities in their own right, if you think of East Leeds. But we just haven't had that amount of new you know, cultural institutions based there. So I would love to work with the, you know, the bigger institutions and the smaller ones in the city to bring that to life, so that every ward in the city has access to those opportunities in the same way as, you know, if you were growing up in the most affluent ward or the poorest ward. And that to me is, you know, that's the really exciting thing. Think of the next generation of Corinne Bailey-Rays, or, you know, I could reel off all these sort of, you know, Leeds creatives who we could have coming through in the next phase. And James, I know, who's on, I don't know if he's still on, you know, James it always strikes me, James's vision for the Playhouse was always about, you know, telling the story of the city. And we've got to do that, and we've got to bring those opportunities to those people, young and old, actually, because there's lots of, you know, older people who haven't had that opportunity as well, who we should open it up for as well. And the dementia friendly work that's been done, for example, is brilliant as well in the city.
Well, you've revealed that you're getting your jab soon, Tom, so or hopefully getting your jab soon. So yeah, it needs to be all people in the city. I think what you said also about reaching out, and he's been very, you know, and the team have worked very hard, and as you say, with Eric now, on what that means outside of the city centre. I know that you and the rest of the council look at the city as a whole, the district as a whole, within that. I mean, one of the points that Kate made was the importance of, you know, healthcare in the city. I mean, it's quite staggering, the numbers of people. You know, there's almost 60,000 people working in health and care in Leeds, which is, you know, is about, you know, not far off 10% of the entire population, or just under 10% of the entire population of the city. I mean, that's quite an important future, isn't it? Not just for, as you said, whether it's about mental health or our physical health. It's a really important part of our city, and making sure that we are caring and compassionate. Yeah,
and you know, there's that agenda is so exciting. For those of you who aren't aware, we've got you know, there was a period where Leeds wasn't really mentioned in health, and we've worked really hard back to that sort of partnership, activist partnership working, whereby, you know, the hospital now has this tremendous vision for a new children's hospital, and you know, an extension of the cancer and heart surgery and care that happens, that's a world leading in the city, and has the agreement in principle for the, you know, for that to happen, hundreds of millions of pounds of capital redevelopment adjacent to the city centre. Really exciting. We've got one of the most highly functioning, what are called integrated care systems, where we have a really close working relationship between our GPs, our hospital, our voluntary sector in the city, whereby, you know, when the pandemic hit, the council helped get laptops to loads of GP surgeries, and we've managed to, you know, get them online quicker than ever before. We share, the council and the GPs through the CCG in the city share a tech, you know, the most senior tech post in our organisations. Leonardo Tantari has just taken over from Dylan Roberts, and so we work very closely on that. We've got health innovation coming out of the MIT REAP work, which has been amazingly successful. And, you know, we've now got, you know, this very exciting cohort of young entrepreneurs coming through, where we're trying to focus on social outcomes, which is linked to the, you know, the health economy as well. We've got tremendous, you know, we play a tremendous role regionally and nationally through the hospital trust. And so I think that it's a real opportunity. We haven't been able to fill nursing or social or caring vacancies over the last 5 years. We have huge unemployment hitting us. It's a big opportunity to fill those vacancies. Going back to those young people who maybe haven't thought about going into nursing or care, who might want to now, let's take up that opportunity. Let's get people transferred with the skills that they need to fill those gaps.
Yeah, I mean that's a really important point. I mean, a number of the panelists touched upon the need for skills, new skills, digital skills, and a broad range of what you might call interpersonal skills. Where are you in terms of things like full living wage? The council's a supporter of that. Is that something you're going to maintain in the future? And how do you encourage other organisations and businesses to follow you on that?
Yeah, we are. We very much a supporter of that, and we pay it ourselves, the real living wage. And we are working to make sure that everybody who we have a contract with does that as well. That's not as easy in some sectors who are challenged financially because of the overall financial position in terms of things like social care. But we believe that if we're going to achieve our potential as a city, we've got to have a fair real living wage for everybody being paid. So again, we would really encourage everybody on the call and all our partners to make sure that's happening. I think it's going to be increasingly something that prospective employees will be asking, customers will be asking of businesses. It's something that will be. I think it has shown. The pandemic again has shown how hard it is to live on anything but a real living wage, and that is something that we want to make sure that everybody in the city is paying and continues to pay, and it's a crucial part of our social agenda as well as our economic one.
That's great, thanks, Tom. Charles wanted to just come in and ask a question. Are you happy with that? That's that.
Sure.
Yeah. Just come in.
Tom, thank you very much. Tom, I just want to get your thoughts on the issue of carbon neutrality, and especially in two areas. And I think these are two areas where I think Leeds will have to look carefully about its skills and competencies. One is on transportation, and the other one is on construction, the built environment. These are the two areas where we need to really, really work on if we're going to reduce our carbon footprint. But these are areas where we need the skills. So there's an issue for innovation in these areas, but at the same time, be minded that we need some growth in those areas and build on the skills. What are your general thoughts about those two areas and how they might impact on our movement towards carbon neutrality or carbon footprint reduction?
Thanks, Charles. Great to see you. I think the on transport, obviously, if we were able to achieve a solution on mass transit and the work we're doing on HS2 and the particularly, I think the improvement in our buses to make sure that everybody in Leeds has access to regular and affordable bus transport. That could make a huge difference, I think, to our ability to hit carbon neutrality. I obviously will mention the airport and the recent, decision around that, whereby, I think that is something that we've tussled with, and it's been a real challenge. But at the end of the day, it needs a national and a global solution to the issue of aircraft emissions, rather than just us taking unilateral decisions on that. And I know that's a very live and controversial issue for us as a city, but I do think that we've got to the right solution, but we need to work very carefully moving forward to get more of that national framework in place to help us achieve that. But on transport and the Connecting Leeds work that's happened while people have been away from the city, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see the changes once you get back, in terms of how much progress has been made on cycle lanes and bus lanes and helping improve things in the city centre. On the construction side, I think it's absolutely a really live issue. So when we've been looking at our 100 million going into carbon retrofit, the real barrier to getting that done more quickly is not actually money, it's skills, because we don't have people trained up ready to provide that work and to get it done. And so I think we've got to work with the colleges in the city, work with the schools and the universities to prioritise that, because it is a growth area and it is one that's going to loom much larger moving forward. I would like to see the construction industry and the development industry more generally factor full life cycle costs into their assessment of value, which I think would make a big difference to whether they would accelerate their work to net carbon zero buildings, Charles. So I would throw that in as an issue. And as the globally the fiduciary duties have changed, and pension funds and others now have to take account of carbon and climate change, I expect that will come, but I don't think it's happening fast enough. So I'd like to see that too.
Tom, you never surprise me, really, the breadth of things that you cover in all these questions. So as you keep answering the hard ones, here's another one for you. So one of the questions we've had in is about the future of automation and AI. What's your thoughts in that, and how will Leeds prosper in that new world?
Yeah, I don't fear the robots. I think, you know, we've got to. I think there are huge issues around this, actually. One is, I think, as we saw from earlier last year, algorithms will play an increasing role, I think, in decisions that are taken about individuals. And I think we've got to have a very strong strong ethical framework to make sure that you know, doesn't penalise people on the basis of any of the equality or diversity considerations that we've got. And we're actually a world leader in data ethics in Leeds through the universities and through the private sector. Some of the legal firms like DLA who are leading on this, and I would like to see us take a major role in that moving forward. Secondly, I think that we've got to embrace the fact that, you know, we can get more efficiency in terms of certain sectors, and to stay competitive and ahead of the game in things like law and other sectors. You know, we need to embrace the role of AI and get ahead of it, so that we can make sure that the jobs that we create in those sectors are, you know, fulfilling ones and do require that human interaction that people will will enjoy in their jobs. But I think there's also obviously a risk to the economy that we've got to be aware of, and make sure that we're staying ahead of that and taking advantage of it. And in organisations like my own, if there are better ways of working because of AI, then, you know, that lead to better outcomes for the people in the city, and better relatively lower council tax, or, you know, less money being spent on, you know, things that aren't as productive, then we should embrace them as well. But yeah, probably one with a long way to go, I guess, that one, Nigel.
Yeah, I agree, Tom, and there'll be some twists and turns on the way. We're nearly out of time, but before I wrap up, I just want to leave you with one question, because I know it's very dear to your heart, and it's really central, I think, to the overall vision for Leeds, and that is future for young people. You've mentioned it quite a few times today. You know, we've talked about a child-friendly city. What is the really big thing about Leeds and young people, and how can it make a difference and lead the way for the rest of the UK?
I think we've just got to stand out on this, and you know, we have a track record on child-friendly city, having a children's mayor, you know, being the best in the country on children's social care, making sure that, you know, we've done tremendous things during the pandemic to support young people. But I think as a partnership, we've got to put this centre stage, because it is younger people who will be hit most when furlough ends. It is, you know, the sort of sectors that have been hit hardest, such as retail and hospitality, are the ones where people tend to start their careers sometimes and stay in them, you know, which is really good. But there is a sort of unlikely disproportionate impact coming on younger people if we're not careful. And I just think we've got to respond to that and get together and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to support them, and that people know that we're looking out for them, and that we we value them, and their voice will be heard moving forward in the city. And I think in some ways London particularly is as challenged as anywhere in the world by COVID and what happens next, because of it being such a footfall economy. We do have that in Leeds city centre, but not to the same extent. And that social aspect of what we're trying to do is a fundamental part of what we want to work on. And as Oli is saying in the chat, if you want to get more involved in that child-friendly initiative, then please get in touch with us, because it will become even more important over the next year. Yeah,
that's great, Tom. I mean, I think that's really central to everything, and it's in the chat. We can get more from Ollie Miles, as said, from the Leeds team. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for being frank as ever and covering a wide spectrum of questions. And what I really always encourages me is it's never just about the words, it's about the actions as well. And I think that's great to see. So thanks for your time as well.
Thank you. No, thanks to everyone as well.
Yeah, I want to say thanks to all the participants. I want to say thank you to all of the panel. Thank you to Olivia for setting us off, and particularly thanks to Eve and the team who have helped pull together the webinar. They've set up the panel and the keynote speech, and doing all the work in the background, which is the really important things. Just a few words, really, just to try and summarise what we've had, because we've covered such a lot of ground. I mean, Councillor Harland did start us off with a really strong vision for Leeds, really stamped what her views would be, and it is about economic opportunity for all of our communities. It's about sustainability, I think she said, and I think it's about inclusivity and fairness, and I think that's central to what the Inclusive Growth Delivery Partnership's all about. So, and I think that must be why people are on the call today. So I think that's a really strong vision, and I think it's got a lot of support in the city, and I'm looking forward to us realising it. I think Eve highlighted some of the challenges we face, and it's been a tough year, I think, for everybody, and I think the city's borne out quite well. I mean, it's quite quiet, but as Eve said, there's a lot of positive things going on in the city. A lot of interest in the city in terms of investment, a lot of new developments. Tom's talked about the work with the British Library and Channel 4. We've talked about some of the things that have gone on through Connecting Leeds, and I think we see a bright future for Leeds, but it's going to take some work. And I think the opportunities are there, but we've got to work hard in partnership. And that's something that all of the panelists identified. I mean, Charles spoke very, very passionately about the importance of having a broad range of skills, something that's really important for the future, and the importance of lifelong learning. Bill Jones was set the scene around sustainability, around a net zero carbon future, around the opportunities that would create. And I think there are some real positives there for Leeds. Leeds has got the strong innovation that's going to need. It's got a desire to achieve that outcome quickly. It set some very challenging targets both in Leeds and in West Yorkshire. So I think there's some real positive messages coming out around the green jobs front. And Kate and Sarah were very, very strong about how you work in partnership and engage with all of our communities, so everyone feels that they've got a future and a role to play, and how you unlock that talent within the city to make sure that we don't leave people behind, and that we can all share in a bright future. And I think that is something that Tom went on to emphasize. And I think in terms of what Tom was saying, for me, I think is really important is that we've got the basic ingredients in Leeds. We've got the institutions, we've got the organisation in place, we've got the businesses, and we've got the talent. And I think it's how we harness all of those to create our future in whatever the new world throws at us, whether it's different types of working or whether it's different skills or different types of employment. And I think Olivia, in her keynote speech, really identified those changes that are, some of them structural and underlying in the economy, and some of them as a result of COVID. And I think a resilient city is one that's going to be highly skilled, it's going to be agile, and it's going to be committed to working to create a better place. And I think Tom, in his question and answer session, was really strong about the importance of being distinctive within Leeds. So I'd like to thank everyone again for both participating and also sharing their views as to what the future holds. We've got another session of the extended partnership in July. I'm just going to check for the day. I think it is a bit struggling here. Eve, do you know? Do you know when the date is?
Sorry, don't have it off the top of my head.
I know Vanessa's very kind enough to write it down for me, and I've lost it. But we'll be in touch. We'll be in touch with everyone and publicising it. We will also have. Oh, it's the 8th of July. Vanessa's just popped it up into the chat. It's the 8th of July. We'll be out in touch with everyone about what we think the contents of that could look like shortly. We hope you'll join us in that. We'll hopefully carry on working together in the interim around partnership, and I hope everyone has a safe few weeks until we're out of lockdown. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.